to consider being connected to one another during this very difficult time. So I'm going to read what Tara read so beautifully this morning. The last verse of Romans 12:13 says, share with God's people who are in need, practice hospitality. Practice hospitality. I don't think that means do hospitality. I think it means practice, which means learning how to be hospitable. And that's what we're going to learn this morning from our father, our patriarch Abraham. And in this portion that we're going to talk about, I see four sections, four activities that Abraham showed us that will help us learn how to be more hospitable. He says that when you're going to be hospitable, you need to greet your guests enthusiastically. Number two, if you're going to be hospitable, you need to make your guests comfortable. Number three, if you're going to show hospitality, you need to feed your guests amply. And number four, if you are going to be hospitable, you need to be completely hospitable from the beginning to the end. And we'll talk about that this morning. The word hospitality in Greek is philoxenos, and it means to love a stranger. Xenos in Greek is like the Hebrew word ger, or foreigner or stranger. So that's the word that we're looking at this morning. And let me read the text to you a section at a time and make some comments. Adonai appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre as he sat at the entrance to the tent during the heat of the day. Now, what was he doing sitting in the tent in the heat of the day? He just was circumcised. He was an old man when he got circumcised, and I'm sure it was not a fun experience for him, but that was his dedication to God, to allow himself, actually it says he circumcised himself, which I can't imagine, but that's what it says. And he was sitting, kind of recovering from this in his tent in the heat of the day. He raised his eyes and looked, and there in front of him stood three men. Now we know from the letter to the Hebrews that these three men were, some sense, spiritually men. They were angels. That's what the writer to the Hebrews says. Now I should tell you that the word angel also means messenger. And so these three men in some ways were spiritual, because we know that they were actually considered to be connected to God himself in a very direct way. And even Yeshua is considered to be, sometimes considered to be one of them. But these are three messengers that Abraham talked to. Okay, I understand that my tablet was focused at the ceiling, not at me, so I'm adjusting it. I hope that's better. I'm trying to deal with my laptop and my tablet all at the same time, and for a technically challenged person, that is a challenge. So bear with me. I hope that's better. Lisa can let me know how we're doing on that. Anyway, this is an interesting note that he was sitting, recovering from his circumcision, and these three angels or three men came. The point I want to make is his response to this, because you'll see that he greets his guests enthusiastically. Listen to what it says. On seeing them, he ran from the tent door to meet them, prostrated himself on the ground. Now he ran. He had just been circumcised. It's the heat of the day. And these were not even relatives. These were Bedouins. These were not fellow Hebrews. But he's showing hospitality. It's a message that I think we in our country, the United States, need to remember, because we are a mixture of many, many nationalities in our country, and we need to be hospitable to one another. I know there's a lot of conflict right now in the country about many things, one of which is so-called foreign aliens who come. And I do agree that people who live in the country need to follow the laws of the country, specifically applying for citizenship the correct way. There's a real important reason for that. I'll just share with you that if people just move into the country without knowing anything about the country, they'll never feel comfortable in the country. It's like we can't let anybody just come to the congregation and join our congregation unless they understand what we do and kind of why we do it. So that's why we want people, before they apply for membership, to have attended services for quite a few months just to get the hang of what we do and why we do it. It just makes for a stronger, more united community. But he runs to them. He's excited. He's showing hospitality. And the first point is that when you are going to be hospitable, you want to greet your guests enthusiastically, not timidly, enthusiastically. I can imagine Abraham throwing his arms around these guests and saying, "So glad you're here." And they probably say, "What's with this guy? He's awfully friendly," but that's the way it was in those days. So that's Abraham's nature. He was very friendly to them, and these were, as I said, Bedouins, not Hebrews. He prostrated himself on the ground. That was an act of submission. And when you're really going to be hospitable to other people, whether they're strangers or even loved ones, we need to understand to be humble and prostrate ourselves. I don't mean you have to lay down on the ground anytime you meet somebody, but the attitude of humility is important when you're meeting somebody. The act of shaking hands actually goes back many centuries, and it was an act of humility, because when you reach out to shake somebody's hand, literally you make yourself vulnerable to be stabbed in the back. I know that sounds crazy, but that when a person was willing to reach out and shake hands, it showed that they were trusting the person and they were going to be humble toward that person. So it's just in a sense, it kind of comes from this teaching from Abraham to make himself humble. I think it's to be able to show hospitality. We know the word ahava in Hebrew means love, but the Hebrew word for give is hav, middle of ahava. So to really show love, we have to be giving, and that's the way we see here in with the life of Abraham. Now, I'd like to know if we could get that slide up that I chose, because I think it's a good time to talk about this. There's a slide that I chose of liberty. I know you all familiar with that. There, it's coming up. I don't know if it's coming up on I see it on the Zoom, but I don't know if it's coming up on the Facebook. But I think everybody knows what the Statue of Liberty looks like. I want to talk about that for a minute because it's relevant. The Statue of Liberty has a prayer on it, or actually a sonata. It was sort of a song that was written in ancient times. It's called the New Colossus. Let me read this to you because I think it's going to be relevant, especially when I come to the latter part of this. The New Colossus is what it's called. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame lightning, and her name Mother of Exiles. So even though the Greek way was this Colossus, and they looked at power, this poem that Emma Lazarus wrote, I'm going to tell you about in a minute, spoke of this Statue of Liberty being called the Mother of Exiles. Goes on, from her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities. Keep ancient lands, you storied pomp, she cries. In other words, you ancient Greeks, with silent lips, she says, this is the Statue of Liberty, and what she says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Let me tell you briefly about Emma Lazarus. She was a Sephardic Jew from from Portuguese descent, who lived in New York City from the very early days. She was born in New York in 1849, a wealthy daughter of a sugar refining family from Portugal. And she was something of a poet. So she was asked this poem that I just read to you, somewhat for the purpose of raising funds for the Statue of Liberty. So she wrote it, but she was thinking all the while of the people that she saw as Jewish immigrants, her own people that were coming to the United States to escape persecution in Europe. So even though this has a wider application, initially Emma Lazarus, young Jewish girl, called this sonnet the mother of exiles, because to her, she was trying to write something to help the United States learn about hospitality. Where do you think she got that from? I think it's entirely possible that she got that from Va'era, because she, as a religious Jewish woman, heard these teachings in synagogue, I'm sure, and knew all about Avraham back in those days. So I believe that maybe to some extent, her writing of this sonnet and that has been used so much in the future, it was used so much in the future to speak to people who are immigrants and to Americans to embrace immigrants, kind of comes from Va'era, the teachings of Abraham's hospitality. So I don't know whether you know this, but to this day in the Middle East, the same method of hospitality is used when somebody is a guest. It's considered a privilege to serve them, a blessing to serve them. In some countries, it is felt to be a sacred duty to receive, feed, and lodge and protect any traveler who might stop at the door. In Job, which is the oldest book in the Bible, we believe, the stranger did not lodge in the street, but I opened my doors to the traveler. It's all about showing hospitality. And I suggest that one thing we need to keep in mind to become better at hospitality, to learn how to practice hospitality, is to learn how to love the unlovely, to learn how to be hospitable to the people we might not want to be hospitable toward. That's what it takes to practice anything. When you want to lift weights, there's a saying that no pain, no gain. So when you practice weightlifting, the higher the weights you can lift, the stronger you get. So we learn how to practice hospitality by showing hospitality to the ones that you might not want to show hospitality to. Perhaps the lame, the disfigured people, the crippled, the blind. The Bible says, how blessed you will be that they have nothing with which to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So all of us need to remember that one aspect of practicing hospitality is to greet our guests with enthusiasm, greet our guests enthusiastically. The fourth verse of here says that, please let me send for some water so that you can wash your feet, then rest under the tree. So Abraham is making these guests, angels, he wants them to be comfortable. And when you would travel in ancient Middle East with no paved roads to speak of, and on those roads traveled camels and donkeys and other kinds of animals, you know, your feet got a little bit messed up. So if you're going to go to somebody's house and they offer to wash your feet, it's not just a simple thing. They may have to really wash their feet. So I think we need to learn something from that. And he's telling these guests that he's willing to do that. Now, this is Abraham. Abraham became the father of many nations, Avraham, and yet he was willing to wash the feet of these guests. We see this in the life of Yeshua. At the last Seder, he washed the feet of all the people sitting around the table. Really, if we're going to be people of importance, we're going to be leaders, if we're going to show, as Messianic people, we're going to show others how to live, we need to be willing, at least symbolically, if nothing else, to wash the feet of those people that we are going to serve, to make them hospitable. And then he goes on to say, please, you can wash your feet and rest under the tree, and I will bring you a piece of bread, a piece of bread. Now, it's interesting that he says piece of bread because that's not what he did. What he did, he asked his wife, Sarah, to go make a great loaf of delicious bread. And I'll bet she was a great baker. It wasn't he grabbed a little teeny piece of bread and gave it to them. The scripture indicates that he brought out a loaf of bread to them because he was trying to make them feel really at home. Now, you know, at Emmanuel, we insist on serving bagels to our guests because we're a Messianic Jewish congregation, and Jewish bread became bagels. They become really popular over the centuries, so that everybody eats bagels. But we always have bread and cream cheese for hospitality. And of course, as you know, if you've been at Emmanuel a lot, or any, we always have a wonderful spread of food because it's important for us to eat together. Now, I know we can't do this now, and I don't know when we're going to be able to get back to closer fellowship, and I hope it's soon. I'm sure you do as well. But the goal here is to greet our guests enthusiastically, like Abraham ran to his guests, and also try to help our guests be comfortable, give them a chance to wash their feet. And by the way, that's also a euphemism for going to the bathroom. I know that that's not in the text, but it's understood that when you invite somebody to wash their feet, you're also inviting them to use your bathroom. So we have a lot of bathrooms at the gathering place, so we're good there. So he was trying to help them be comfortable. Somebody once wrote that when you're in a foreign country, it's not designed to make you comfortable. It's designed to make the people who live in that country comfortable. So if people come to Emmanuel, it's not their country, if you will. It's another congregation. So we have to do what we can to make the people comfortable. Last year, after our tour to Israel, Lisa and I spent about 3 days in Italy, in Rome, and we loved being there. And we were moved by a lot of the hospitality people showed us. We knew there was hospitality in Jerusalem. That's just sort of part and parcel of being a citizen of Jerusalem. But in Rome, people were very hospitable to us as well, and so we had a great time there. So when we practice hospitality, we have to be enthusiastic when we greet our guests, and we have to make them feel comfortable and make them feel right at home when they come to visit. Our father Abraham demonstrated this very clearly, and then he fed the guests amply. So I read a little article here, Abraham, the ultimate host. This week we read Parsha Va'era. In the beginning of the selection, Abraham is visited by 3 travelers. When he sees them approaching, he summons his wife Sarah to prepare cakes and offers them pastries with bread and his best calf meat. In other words, it wasn't just some piece of fish that was common, but he actually sought to slaughtering one of his best calves. I know that may sound a little bit unpleasant nowadays, but it was a way of showing hospitality. And both Abraham and Sarah served these guests. Abraham gave them the best and gave them in quantity, and tried to feed his guests amply. It was more than just a morsel of bread, more than just some fresh bread and tender calf and curds and milk. He provided all this hospitality to them, and he did it in a humble way. He said, "I'm just going to serve you a little crust of bread." But what he did, he put out a banquet. Basically, it was the way of talking in the Middle East. It's not false humility. It was just a style of talking that people were. You don't speak. You don't boast. And in a way, what he was doing was starting humbly. There's an expression that we need to remember, that people need to learn to under-promise but over-perform. That's exactly what Abraham was doing here in showing hospitality. He was under-promising. I'm just going to bring you a crust of bread, but he overperformed by bringing out the whole spread. and I'm pretty impressed with that. The word asa, which is the use where he says, I'm going to feed my guests to provide for them. Asa, the Hebrew word, means to prepare with purpose. It wasn't just an accident. It wasn't less than one of those things, I'll just go ask Sarah to whip something up. No, there was real conviction and commitment to preparing something really special. That's what hospitality is. So keep that in mind. I'm going to continue. We want to put out our best for our guests. This is something that needs to be importantly stated. My mother, may God bless her, she's 97. She can't practice hospitality anymore because she's in a senior citizen condo. And right now she needs people to show hospitality and helps to her. So Lisa and I spend some time with her as much as we can. But when we're going to show hospitality to people, we want to make sure that when they come to visit us, we leave food for them to take. So our dear matriarch Belle, may God rest her soul, and I know God is delighted to have Belle in heaven, because who would not like being around Belle for eternity? So when Belle used to be at our services, after we were done and we had oneg, our lunchtime, Belle would make sure that people left with a little packet of food. She was like that. She was a Jewish woman who was raised in a Jewish world, and nobody left hungry when they left Emmanuel. They got fed at Emmanuel, and Belle made sure they left with leftovers. And that practice has been continued to this day. That is real hospitality. It's not enough to just feed people when they come. It's make sure they have food when they leave. So my mother, in the old days when she was being a hostess with the mostess, when people would come to visit our house, they would not leave empty-handed. I often wonder, Mom, what are you doing with all that wonderful food that you made? And she said, these are our guests. They need to be treated with respect. And to her, looking after her guests was important to her, to show hospitality to them. I want to read verse 16 here, because I think we see this in the life of Abraham. It says that the three men set out from there after they had been used the bathroom, had their feet washed, and had a great meal. It says they set out from there and looked over towards Sodom. This is the beginning of these people going to Sodom. I'm not don't want to go into that this morning, but it's the conclusion of verse 16 of chapter 18 says, and Abraham went with them to see them on their way. What do you think that meant? He didn't say sitting. Remember, he just was circumcised, so he probably was still healing, and he just had this big meal, so he probably wanted to lay around and kind of digest. But when these men left, the scriptures tells us that Abraham went with them to see them on their way, and we don't know how far he went to show them on their way, but you could tell that he stayed with them throughout the meal, and he showed them on their way. The scripture also says that I back up to verse 8. When they were eating the food, it said that he set before the men. It says Abraham stood by them under the tree as they ate. So what was he doing? He wasn't interfering with their meal because maybe they had things to talk about, but he stood apart from them. But he watched them to make sure that they were comfortable. Any decent restaurant you go to, the purpose of a server, a waitress, a waiter, whatever, is not just to get the food on the table, but to make sure you enjoy the food on the table. So to pop by from time to time and say, anything else you need, sir? I often ask for salt and pepper because sometimes there's not enough seasoning for me. But the aspect of being a good waiter is to not just seat somebody and bring them their food as Abraham did, but to stand by and watch to make sure that they are being well taken care of. Practical example, when we get back to services at the gathering place and we have oneg, we will want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on our guests to make sure that they not just have food, but they might have questions about what we do at our services. And we, as members and regular attendees of Emmanuel, need to be willing to explain things. We're going to give them spiritual food as well as physical food, but we need to stand by and be at the ready to answer questions and provide salt and pepper shakers, as I was saying, in a materialistic way. But we want to make sure that our guests are always well taken care of from the beginning, when they show up, to when they leave. So Abraham, it says, went on the way with these men. I don't know how far he went. Maybe he went to Sodom. I don't know for sure. Maybe it's in somewhere. I don't remember that. But he went with them. He showed them out. So when people come to my house, although we haven't had guests for a long time, I learned this principle that I don't just say bye-bye. I walk our guests to the door. I open the door. I make sure the light on the porch is on so they don't stumble down the steps. And I make sure to see them off until they get into the car. I want to make sure that comes to my house is comfortable. I learned once about this from a wedding I went to where the father of the bride actually picked up his guests in a limousine. This was a wealthy father of the bride, obviously. And he picked up his guests at one location and drove them all the way to the wedding. He wanted to make sure his guests were comfortable from before they entered the wedding. And then even at the end, he sent a limousine to take them back to their cars. That's called looking after your guests. Now, we don't have to go quite that far, but the idea is to pay attention to our guests before, during, and after the time that they are with us. So I mentioned at the beginning the word philoxenos, meaning loving of strangers, and that's the calling that is on us as believers, especially. But there's another word I want to share with you called xenophobia. Xenophobia comes from Greek, and it means fear of strangers. And this is something that some people have. They're so afraid to meet new people. They're almost afraid of new people. And that's something we need to learn how to get over if we're going to practice hospitality. If we fear people, we can't be hospitable to them because we're afraid of them. So it's just something that we need to learn to do by trying to do it. Paul, the apostle, talked to his disciple Timothy and Titus, and he wanted to encourage them to be hospitable. So he said, hospitality in Titus is one of the smaller New Testament books. It's a letter that Paul wrote to one of his disciples, Titus. He said, hospitality is a characteristic of all elders. And this is also referenced in Timothy. When Paul was teaching them how to develop a congregation, he said, anybody who's going to be a leader in the congregation or an elder in the congregation needs to be a servant. And one of the ways of being a servant is to practice hospitality. So there we have it again. We read from Romans, but in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9, Peter writes, offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. In other words, when we're practicing hospitality, we have to have the right attitude about it. If we're grumbling about being hospitable, I don't really want to do that, well, we're losing our blessing and we're going to cause problems. We need to practice hospitality without grumbling. The New Testament writers all believed in hospitality, and they encouraged it greatly. So here's a little story. The first time I went to Israel, maybe, 30 years ago, I don't remember now, I went into one of the little shops in the shuk. The shuk is where all the marketplace is. These are not like they're outdoor malls, but nothing fancy at all. Not like the Columbia Mall or anything like that. These are like little shops with maybe they're 10 by 10. And there was a little Turkish man who had an item on the floor that I thought was really terrific. I purchased it. I don't know where it went, but it's gone now. It was a big round, kind of like a basin, about 4 inches high and maybe 3 feet across in diameter, and it looked like it was made out of brass. And I just wanted to have it for my my new house that we had built. anyway, so he was talking with me and he invited me to come into his shuk and sit down. And he sent his cousin to go get a cup of Turkish coffee. Now, if you've never had Turkish coffee, you're in for a treat. It's very, very strong. If you like caffeine, Turkish coffee will do it to you, but they fill it with sugar because it's so bitter, it's hard to take. So it's almost like drinking a cup of caffeinated ice cream. It's that sweet. It was very tasty. He showed me Middle Eastern hospitality is what it was. Yeah, he was trying to sell me this big pot, and he did. We negotiated. It was a lot of fun, so I got a good price on it. But um, he he showed this hospitality, and it's the way it is in the Middle East, and we need to remember that for our congregation as well. So let me share one verse with you in closing that I think is quite relevant. This is from Messianic Jews, chapter 13, verse 2, and it refers to the story that we read about this morning in Vayera about Abraham and the three guests, amen/angels. This is what the writer to the Hebrews said. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing so, some people have entertained angels without even knowing it. I think that's a great message for us. When we entertain people, when we meet anybody, we don't even know who they are. Maybe, as happened with Abraham, these were angels. He didn't know that at first. He just was trying to be hospitable to his human guests. Turned out they were messengers from God, and that's called angels. So the writer to the Hebrews says, be willing to show hospitality to anybody because you might be showing hospitality to an angel, a messenger from God, and God really does appreciate it. So we've seen how important hospitality is in the text, and these examples from Elisha and the Brit Hadashah. And I guess the challenge to all of us is to keep showing hospitality to one another, whether we call each other from time to time, text each other, email each other, participate in our morning prayer times at 6 o'clock on Monday and Friday on the other Zoom link, or gather to study the Bible together, or a book study on Tuesday night. We want to stay in touch with each other, and if nothing else, we can do that, and that would be a great way right now to practice hospitality. May God help us do that more and more each day, especially until we get back together at the gathering place. Shabbat Shalom.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל